Theresa May could not drive Parliament to a decision. She did not have the power to make it happen.
I think colleagues became more and more frustrated that it wasn't clear how we were going to move forward in any way.
Political power is so ephemeral, it just dissipates, and it was clear that power was dissipating.
The Conservatives were so violently divided, the Prime Minister took a last gasp by looking to the other side.
It was a sign of Theresa May's desperation that she reached out to the opposition parties because, frankly, her own party was absolutely impossible to deal with. But it was far too late. She was always in a difficult position because she was a Remainer, albeit a very quiet one, who'd become the leader of a rabidly Eurosceptic anti-EU membership party.
I think that the compromise was almost impossible. There wasn't a version of Brexit that was going to be leaving enough. We'd have to leave everything else or tow the country to somewhere else. There just wasn't, it was just an insatiable, felt like an insatiable demand.
Talks between Labour and the Tories stuttered along for a while. Looking back, though, it was just too late. Things were so stuck that all sorts of ideas were on the table. Leaving the EU without a deal, hated in Remainer quarters. Asking the public to vote again in another referendum, despised by Brexiteers. But Parliament was failing. There was even talk of another PM.
I do remember a weekend when it was suggested to me that actually Theresa May would go, David Lidington would become the Prime Minister, there would be a second referendum and this deal would all happen. How much of that is true and what do you remember?
It's not a conversation I've ever had with David, but it was definitely something that some people were talking about as a sort of potential way through.
How does it feel to you that, you know, there were conversations about a national government where you would have become Prime Minister, done a deal with the Labour Party? I think some people who were on the Brexit side of the argument might think that there were plots going on, and actually, frankly, that would have been an outrage.
Yes, that was what happened, I think, at the end of the day. That Theresa was not going to go. I mean, that was very clear, and I certainly never made any suggestion to her or made any move against her. I would not have done so. But there weren't conspiracies. What there were increasingly desperate searches for ways in which to break the deadlock with a deal.
One by one, the doors closed on Theresa May.
I think the country had a good sense that we were in a real crisis in government.
The only way out was for her to go, leaving behind a broken Parliament, a battered party, and no Brexit.
So when it came then to the day, it was obvious that she wasn't going to go on. You were, of course, one of the people who had to take her through that decision, and I think it was just you and her then at the end.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us what that was like?
It's obviously a very... I felt like I'd let her down. Because, there's not a job description to being Chief of Staff, but if you were going to write one, paragraph 1.0 is keep the Prime Minister in number 10. So it was a very painful moment, but she made it very easy for me because she said, I've talked to Philip and I've come to the same conclusion.
I do so with no ill will, with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
Kind of ran in through number 11 to catch her up. She was waiting for me outside the cabinet room, and she sort of straight away apologised for getting emotional. And it's the one time when I lost my temper with her a little bit. And I sort of said, "What? You know, why are you apologising for showing some emotion? Like for 2 years, I've said to you, show more of yourself to people." And then she just said, "Okay, yeah, but you wait and see. The newspapers will use those images differently because I'm a woman." And she was right, actually, in terms of how the images were then portrayed, I think.
Was Theresa May a good Prime Minister?
No, sadly. She wasn't not a good Prime Minister, it's an utter catastrophic disaster.
Yes, she was.
And I think if it hadn't been for the Brexit negotiation, she would have continued to be a good Prime Minister.
Probably my favourite bit of working with Theresa May was right at the end, when she just went and did all of the things on her list. She really meant it about injustice, and particularly what she could do for women and people who didn't have a voice. She's a really very, very, very impressive person to work for, and somebody who inhabited the office of Prime Minister kind of totally.
Theresa May's a good person, but it's hard to say she was a good Prime Minister because of the great difficulties that arose over Brexit and the 2017 election.
The Conservative Party is historically the party of stability, sound government, proper management, etc. To be honest, I think the chaos of 2017 and 2018 had already significantly undermined our reputation.
Strong and stable? More like messy and miserable. Conservatives reckon their reputation might be shot. Yet, inside government, civil servants were preparing to do it all again.
It's a very weird experience, those days of PM changeover. She's saying goodbye and thank you. If you're me and the Cabinet Secretary, and you're all thinking, sort of brace, brace, ready for what's coming next.
Looking back, perhaps it was always going to have to be Boris Johnson. Political karma. That Brexit's biggest cheerleader would have to clear up the mess or make the most of the opportunity, depending which camp you asked.
We must now respect that decision.
But his approach would be totally different. Divide and rule. The method, perhaps the madness, drive anyone who disagreed into the ground.
This is the start of a new and very different era. Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers are now in charge. But maybe they're not so much taking back control and inheriting a precarious and fragile position.
The Prime Minister's chief plotter and sidekick, Dominic Cummings, for whom provocation was how to get things done.
The way that Boris Johnson ran Number 10 was different from any Prime Minister in my professional life. He brought in the most powerful Chief of Staff the United Kingdom has ever seen. Until that point, Prime Ministers and their staff have been in basic sympathy with the system. They've all wanted to change it in some way, but nobody else has wanted to break it first.
They switched the team, promised to leave the EU at Halloween, whatever the cost. But they had to unstick the same problem Theresa May had, gridlock in Parliament. Dark whispers about closing the Commons down, proroguing or shutting Parliament, were denied, but then swirled and then denied again. Would they dare?
You had lunch with Dominic Cummings the day before prorogation.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Where were you and what did he say to you?
Yeah, we were in the cafe and downstairs in Downing Street. Boris and Dominic Cummings as his sort of henchman on Brexit, they knew that I was against prorogation. I asked him, are you going to prorogue Parliament? And he said no.
At midnight, a cabinet minister called me in outrage to say Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the Privy Councillors, was heading to see the Queen the next morning. Proroguing Parliament, keeping the Commons closed for weeks to prevent MPs checking or stopping Boris Johnson's Brexit. It really was the secret plan, despite those weeks of denial.